Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. My name is Matt Rosu. I'm Dean of the Sigmund Weiss School of Business at Susquehanna University and Professor of Economics. And excited today to have Allie Grill, who's Director of our Career Development Center. And we're going to talk to you a little bit today about some tips for graduates starting their first job, right? We're recording this, it's late June. Mm-hmm. And millions of people across the country have graduated either high school and they're going straight into the workforce, or college and going straight into the workforce. And I guess the first thing, if you've got that first job, congratulations, right? That's hurdle number one. Now though, I guess adulting 101 comes into play. So, Allie, I'll start. What's maybe a first tip you might recommend for brand new graduates starting a first job, a million things going on? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think that there's a lot of excitement when a new grad, whether it's high school or college, starts a new job and the anticipation of the first paycheck. Yep. But understanding the components of that paycheck, what you actually take home in terms of your income, where income goes to taxes or to possible retirement, and understanding what that net income looks like for your first paycheck is important for budgeting purposes. And so one of the things that we talked about in the article is how oftentimes an employer will offer a 401k benefit. Yeah. And so understanding that does come out of your first paycheck, but there's often an incentive of employer matching, which I think is important to take advantage of early, even though it seems way far out to retirement.
Yeah, it's almost like that's two in one.
Yes.
Starting at the first, so what you're offered. So if you're making like a really good offer, might be like $60,000 a year for some, and there's some, I know some in the business school do get more than that, but that's a pretty nice offer, and that works out to $5,000 a month. Just taking the 6,000 dividing by 12, and everybody who's worked knows this, but you're not getting $5,000 in cash.
Yes.
That is not the amount you have to play with. So yeah, I think understanding, you mentioned the take home. So things that will be taken out, right? You'll lose for Social Security and Medicare, and that's about 8%. If you're in Pennsylvania, you lose another 3% off the top to Pennsylvania income taxes. You lose, depending where you are, there's local. Mm-hmm. So in our area, it's 2%. So if you're in our area, you're losing, that's 13% like that.
Absolutely.
Before we get to federal taxes.
Yes.
And then federal taxes, you'll lose a little bit. It's not the most at that level because there's a pretty high standard deduction. So budgeting, right? You've got to take 15 to 20% right off the top, and it's gone.
Absolutely. And I think the other cost that could be at play is healthcare. Knowing that some recent graduates could still retain their parents' benefits, I think is important, and that's probably a family discussion, a family conversation that you should have to make that decision. But it could be, depending on where you're located, if you're in network or out of network compared to where your parents live and work, it could be advantageous to have your own health care, which adds an additional expense, which your employer does share. If you look at the total rewards of your benefits, it is a cost savings, based on if you were paying for your healthcare on your own, but still it comes out of your paycheck.
But yeah, very true. So, if you're getting this great job and it's $5,000 a month gross off the bat, $4,000, $3,500. You'll be dealing with a lot less, which is still, of course, more money than, if you're a new grad and you're getting this, it's more money than anybody's ever dealt with before.
Absolutely.
But it's important to know what that is when you're thinking about what type of housing, like what type of place might you be able to afford with your rent, if you've already got dreams of the vacations in your mind or all of that stuff. So I think that's one area, right? First, understand the gross. And then you mentioned taking advantage of a 401k.
Yes.
I would assume most people who are watching this probably know what it is, but I don't know if you want to give the short description of what that is for the new graduates who may not know what that is.
Sure. So a 401k is essentially an employer-sponsored retirement plan where you as an employee would make contributions on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, depending on how you're paid. And the employer can also contribute to that a retirement savings account if it's part of the company policy, and sometimes there's a minimum employee contribution required for an employer to do what they refer to as a matching contribution.
Yeah.
And so a lot of new grads might say, well, I'm not comfortable doing the max or doing the total contribution that I'm able to because my paycheck is not at the level that I would want it to be as a new hire. But my recommendation is to think about maxing out that employee contribution so that you do get the employer match. Essentially, what we talk about it as is free money. You're basically giving that away. And so I think it's important. It's a habit of saving that will benefit you over time. So the earlier you contribute, the more that compound interest takes place. And so that in 4 decades, when you're getting ready to retire, you have a nice savings added up. Some employers, I should mention, do have a vesting period where you might need to be employed at the agency for a year, 3 years, in order to take your contributions and the employer contributions with you when you, let's say you decide to take a new job or you leave that organization for some reason. So it's important to look at the red, the sort of language that accompanies the policies, but it is an advantage no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, and I think I maybe I'm wrong. I can't imagine any firm could take the money a person contributes.
Right, absolutely.
But they could, could be 1, 2, 3 years often. Often, if you're going to leave after a year, the company's basically doesn't. If you're not going to be paying the company back in their investments, they're not going to be vesting. But these are pretty powerful. So let's say, Susquehanna's, this is public information. Susquehanna's is incredibly generous. It's a 9. If an employee contributes 5%, the Susquehanna contributes 9. Mm-hmm. Once again, this is it will remove some of your initial income, but if you put in the 5%, it's essentially like 14% then of your salary is getting invested. That is enormous. Doing that, getting into that habit, and a couple different options on this. Some places will offer, I think the standard is a conventional IRA. Mm-hmm. The term conventional is there. Mm-hmm. If you do that, when you're putting in the money, if you put in 5%, that is not taxed initially, but you will be taxed when you pull the money out. The other option that many firms do is they'll have the ability to do what's called a Roth 401k. And for your portion of the contribution, the Roth, you pay the taxes now, but then all of the growth later, you are not paying the taxes on. When you're first starting out, the Roth probably makes more sense, just because your tax rates won't be too incredibly high when you're starting out in your career. You're paying a little bit more right now, but then later on, that's growing. So these are tax sheltered accounts. You get the benefits. If you get the free money, I think more standard, Susquehanna's is really great at 9%. More standard might be 3%, 5%, something like that.
Exactly. I was seeing a lot of 3, 4 to 5% in new hire packages from our recent graduates at Susquehanna. But it's industry specific. It's regionally specific. And I think that's why we recommend with students is not just looking at the base salary that you're offered, it's really looking at total compensation. And a lot of employers now, I think, are using that as an employee attraction tool of saying, let's look at that sticker price or sort of that salary, but let's factor in all of the other deliverables that you receive as an employee.
I think this kind of relates to another point that we talked about. We talked about first, understand the liability. So what your take-home pay will be different than what your gross pay is.
Sure.
Second thing, look, if there's a 401k or a company match, you take advantage of it and do it early, even if you're starting small. A third that's very related is start doing the investing and start saving right now. Why is it important to think about, somebody's just starting, they've been in college, they've saved to kind of pay for college, and they're probably thinking, oh, my saving days might be over. Not really. Why is it so crucial when somebody starts to save? So.
I think about 2 things. First, I think about habits. So if you start early, these saving habits in your career, and we recommend saving about 10 to 15% of your income, that is a habit that will follow you throughout your lifespan. So it's good to start that early because it's the idea that if you're putting that income directly into a savings account, you're not missing it because you're never really seeing it in your checking account, so to speak. So the habit is important. I think the other factor is just planning for emergency expenses. So with a job, a post-grad job, whether it's high school or college, comes with responsibilities. So you're thinking apartment, transportation, health emergencies, and it's wise to have at least 6 months of your income saved as an emergency fund, just in case there is an event in your life where you would need to draw into that. And I think the reality is a lot of folks in the U.S. in particular work paycheck to paycheck, and so one thing that I'm interested in is how do we get folks to start disrupting that model and thinking more about saving for their future, for themselves and their families.
Yeah, I think I often hear like the 3 to 6 months of expenses, kind of a standard line, but if you were, look, that could be quite a bit.
Absolutely.
That's not a trivial amount. So if you're just starting out, right, if you're saving the 10%, work towards getting that up. But if you're driving and the car breaks down, you don't want to put that on a credit card. No. If something unfortunate happens and you lose your job, it's going to be stressful. No matter what happens, but it'll be a whole lot less stressful if you've okay, I have 3 months of expenses and you're probably getting a little bit of severance. It's just a little bit of a cushion as you find your next job to draw down. You've heard a lot of people regret going into debt. I've never heard anybody regret saying, I started off and I was saving too much. Mm-hmm. If you do, let's say you decide you're going to do 15% or 20% and you really do think it's too much, you can easily fix that later. Right? Mm-hmm. You can cut down. Nobody's too upset. So I think, the emergency I think is key. Mm-hmm. The habit's key. I would, the third point, and you touched on this a little bit, but the compound interest. So if you're doing the investing, compound interest, once again, I imagine most people understand, but it's the idea that you're earning interest, but then because you're just continually investing, the interest you earn then later earns interest. And the small amount saved now can lead to large amounts later. And I know retirement seems like forever away, but it's how long in your life do you want to work? Maybe you'll love working and you'll work forever, but it's nice to have an option to retire sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of hit a few things. In our article, we discussed one final thing, one final tip. I'm sure we could do more, but what other tip would you think is really important for our new grads?
The first one, I sort of hit on it in the very beginning when I talked about the excitement of getting your first job, seeing that first paycheck hit your account. And I think sometimes when we see a large sum, we think, how can I spend that? And I'm excited to spend it. Maybe you, and I could relate to this, as a college student, as a high school student, you're frugal. You're thinking about, maybe just making it and graduation, and then it's almost a treat yourself moment. And so I think what I've seen, especially in, the 18 to 22-year-old population, is they're maybe putting a down payment on a car. They're purchasing a car that, is an attractive vehicle, but maybe not the most cost-effective one. Budgeting for rent, maybe planning on, treating themselves to a vacation or travel to see friends, and suddenly those expenses accumulate, add up. And what that phenomenon is known as is lifestyle inflation. Yeah. We see it not only in people who are getting employment for their first job, but also individuals who receive compensation increases, raises or new jobs, where suddenly they think that they can afford, luxury products, be it a house, car, even, groceries or eating out more. And so I think, if there's one thing that I want to underscore through this conversation is the habit piece, is that when we're thinking about building these habits, we have to think about sustainable habits that won't put an undue burden on your budget.
Sure.
And so I think just being mindful with that, I think being curious about your monthly budget as it relates to your income and expenses is key. And even thinking about how do I budget for things that I would enjoy doing, whether it's entertainment, vacations, and building some predictability about that, I think is really important.
Yeah, and this one's a tough one because it's, you've graduated, you're getting a check. That's you in some ways, right, you've made it, like the first step. It's a big deal when you're getting a first job and a nice paycheck. It really you will not seem wealthy if you're getting, we mentioned the number, like the $5,000 a month, and then you get the money out. If you get a car that costs $800 a month and takes 20% of your check away, you are really not going to feel that rich right away, and could really feel stretched day to day. And like the behavior of trying to be happy, this is a weird, like being happy with what you have to the extent and trying to live frugally and limiting, take vacations, right? Time away is important, but there are ways to do it more expensively and less expensively. Are there ways to do it perhaps a little cheaper? The one interesting, you mentioned on the raises, I know there's a book, Nudge, which the co-written by, I think it's Sunstein and Thaler. And Richard Thaler ended up winning a Nobel Prize. And they mentioned the idea of Save More Tomorrow as a program. But when you get a raise, maybe allocate a little bit of it to spend, but if you can, thinking about the value of saving, if you can save more of it, it's valuable. Oops, I should turn off my cell phone.
Okay.
But it is pretty crucial, essentially, to stay grounded. And that's a tough one. At some point, maybe you will have all the money to buy the more expensive vehicle, to take the luxury vacation, to live in the big expensive house. But when you're first starting out, you probably don't, or at least definitely not all three of those. If you do all three of those, you'll be in debt pretty quickly.
Absolutely. I think that folks of the college age and high school age population now are challenged a little bit in this, because I can remember being raised with a checkbook and having a credits and debits column and kind of doing the manual math. And I would really encourage folks who are interested and curious about their budget to seek out resources. Simply creating, it could be on paper, it could be digital, even a spreadsheet to say, here's all of my anticipated expenses per month, and then kind of building in that savings as a way of essentially paying yourself. But I think that's the first step in kind of building that financial security and then confidence for when you do make a big or kind of an expense to treat yourself, or that you're doing so with confidence, knowing that it won't impact you the following month or even a year from that decision.
No, fantastic. Hopefully those tips, right? It's a big deal. Celebrate, enjoy.
Yes.
For those, and congratulations to everybody who has a job. Getting paychecks is good. It's nice. It's more fun than those who had loans, right, to get through college or scraping by. But hopefully, keep things in check just a little bit. It could be valuable, and you will be much happier in the long run. So,
absolutely.
Any final words of wisdom for our new grads who are starting jobs? So.
I would say that I would encourage folks to take responsibility for their financial well-being and their wellness as much as they're doing their physical health and their career-related growth. I think it's really important, as we said, to build these habits early. And I think that if you are paying attention to it on a monthly, annual basis as well, I think that you'll find that within 10, 15 years' time, you'll be pretty happy with what the result is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you like this sort of content, please click like and subscribe. You can get notified when new videos come out, and look forward to seeing everybody in the next video.